Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise to make a contribution to the debate on the Business Services Wage Assessment Tool Payment Scheme Bill 2014 and the Business Services Wage Assessment Tool Payment Scheme Consequential Amendment Bill 2014. The Greens are deeply concerned about these bills and oppose them, not because we don't think this is an important issue, but we don't think the measures contained in this bill are fair to those working with a disability, in particular intellectual disability, in the workforce and that have been underpaid for a consistent period of time. This issue has been on the agenda for a long period of time with, and I will acknowledge, this is a problem that the current government inherited, and that under the previous government, and in fact I think previous to that, under the previous coalition government, this issue has been raised for quite a long period of time. And because it wasn't adequately addressed by previous governments, we've seen the court cases that have been referred to in this place. People with disability are seriously underrepresented in the workforce in Australia, and those with an intellectual disability especially so. With only 6.9% of working-age people with an intellectual disability reporting work in the open labour market, it is clear that workers with an intellectual disability face, and as Inclusion Australia has said, large gaps of support to help them move into open employment, earn a real wage and reduce their reliance on the pension. Structural change is required. We need better strategies and legislation to encourage and support a greater participation by people with disabilities in the workforce. However, that is clear, and we know that that this has been a significant issue for a period of time. In fact, we know participation in even the public service for people with disability has decreased. We need increased participation of people with disability in our workforce. However, discrimination against workers is completely unacceptable, and this increased participation should not be under reduced or lower wages. The Australian Greens are committed to equal pay for equal work and are very concerned with the distressingly low payments made to people with an intellectual disability who have been assessed under the Business Services Wage Assessment Tool, and do believe this issue needs to be addressed. BSWAT, it's commonly called, has been found by the High Court to be discriminatory towards workers with an intellectual disability. The Human Rights Commission also finds that BSWAT is an unacceptable tool, and concerns have been raised by a variety of peak, disability and legal bodies, including Inclusion, People with Disabilities and AED legal centres. This bill does not adequately address or cease the continued discrimination of workers against under BSWAT, and we have some key concerns regarding this bill, which we did articulate in our dissenting report on this legislation. We are concerned that a payment rather than compensation is being offered. We are concerned that people have to waive their legal rights to access the payment, and we are concerned about the conflict of interest that arises around the power to appoint nominees. The Australian Greens are also concerned with the fact that the bill does not extend to workers with a disability who do not have an intellectual disability, and we support the concerns expressed by PWD at the hearing into this legislation, where they said only people with intellectual disability will be eligible for the payment scheme. A person with psychosocial disability, for example, may work in the same ADE, do the same job and earn the same wage as a person with an intellectual disability, but they have been excluded from the payment scheme. Commonwealth's failure to recognise the violation of rights that people without intellectual disability have experienced will continue. In terms of accessing the payment, approximately half of Australian disability enterprises, commonly called ADEs, use BSWAT, which means there are currently around 10,000 people who have been assessed using the BSWAT model. This bill offers a potential payment of up to 50% of what is already owed on completed work in exchange for workers losing their right to seek a fair pay settlement. In other words, for 50% of what workers are entitled to, they will be asked to sign away their legal rights. Only paying 50% of what they are entitled to is, to our mind, unacceptable. There should be full compensation for unpaid wages. In addition, the lost opportunity of people of what they could have purchased with their rightful wage is not addressed. This is in fact a similar situation to the issue that I've spoken on in this chamber previously, and that is if you compare it, for example, to stolen wages from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. One of the issues that came up during that Senate inquiry quite a long time ago was what could people have achieved if they had actually had access to the wages that were stolen from them in the first place. And the same concept applies here. What would people with intellectual disability have been able to achieve and bought with the money that they would have earned if there was a fairer tool used and they hadn't been discriminated against by the BSWAT tool? They may have been able to get better accommodation. They may have been able to get extra training and support. They may have been able to get better accommodation. There are foregone opportunities lost by the fact that people were not paid adequately. The Australian Greens are very concerned about the tight timeline that people have had to decide if they wish to decide to pursue the payment, and that people won't be able to adequately weigh up all the options to make a decision in their best interest. We are also concerned that there are inadequate provisions being made to ensure that all those affected are aware of their choices and the consequences of decisions. This legislation could lead to unfair outcomes for unpaid workers. There are also consistencies between the payments, such as a person who is found eligible and has made an offer of a payment this year will receive less if they apply to the payment scheme next year, as they would have been working under the BSWAT for longer. This will create unequal outcomes and is unfair, and that was a point that was raised by people with disability during the inquiry. There has been discussions around the appointment of a nominee, and we're still not satisfied with the provisions in the bill. The provisions allow the Secretary of the Department of Social Service to appoint nominees on behalf of unpaid workers without their consent. And we believe this is very concerning. As the ADE Legal Centre said, there is no restriction on who can be appointed and no exclusion of individuals or parties with a conflict of interest. They also go on to say the third point, in my eyes the most important, is the right given to the Secretary to appoint a nominee to effectively stand in the shoes of the supported employees. This is not only a conflict of interest but removes from those employees their very basic human and constitutional rights. There is a very real danger here that the nominee appointed would or could have a larger picture goal in sight rather than that of the employee. As I said, that was from the inquiry into this bill from the AED Legal Centre. The concern here is the issue around supported decision-making, which is vitally important to respecting the rights of people with disability. In the NDIS, there are provisions for supported decision-making, and there has been significant progress in supporting people with intellectual disability to make decisions, and we think this bill does not adequately consider that progress or the provisions to adequately support someone with an intellectual disability to make a decision. Point was made during the inquiry by ADE Legal Centre, which has done a tremendous amount of work on this issue, and I in fact congratulate them. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate them in the work that they have done in supporting people with intellectual disability through this process and raising this issue. So they go on to say, so really the whole provision in this Act around appointing nominees are completely in opposition to respect for supported decision-making and respect for a person's right to legal capacity. I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, that was from that particular quote was from Ms Sands from People with Disability. And then ADE Legal Service go on to say, this is of a conflict of interest, first in having the Secretary being able to appoint a nominee. As to the nominee themselves, the role of that nominee raises the concern that it could be potentially a conflict of interest. This bill, we believe, does not adequately safeguard and ensure people's legal rights are protected. It does not adequately provide for a person's supported decision-making. We're also concerned about the argument that's been brought up about the viability of ADEs, and I acknowledge Likewise, financial support for ADEs to transition. However, I'm still hearing the argument about the viability of ADEs, and quite frankly, it's a fallacious argument. We cannot, and I'm not here commenting on the work that ADEs do, but it is not appropriate for them to argue about their viability by arguing that people with intellectual disability should have lower wages to ensure the viability of ADEs. That argument does not wash. Those sorts of arguments have been used in the past to deny and to excuse poor wages for others. It is not acceptable that they use that argument. ADEs are an important part of work opportunities for people with disability, and in particular as an initial workplace, so that hopefully they can transition to more open employment. And they offer support and employment that are very much in demand. During the inquiry, the viability of ADEs to survive, they had to pay non-discriminatory wages, was brought up on several occasions. As I said, while I can understand their concern, it is not a valid argument. It is just not acceptable to argue that, that they shouldn't be paying wages, fair, non-discriminatory wages for the work that people with intellectual disability carry out. The Greens agreed with People with Disabilities Australia that maintaining the financial viability of ADEs is not a consideration that should trump the right of workers to receive equal pay for work of equal value. I couldn't agree more. It is simply inappropriate to mount that argument. The BSWAT tool has been found to discriminate against workers with an intellectual disability. This legislation does not adequately address the issues that are raised by that issue. We will not support this legislation. This bill does not adequately address the discrimination against workers with intellectual disability. It does not adequately address the issue of compensation. It does not adequately address the lost opportunity of the thousands of workers who have been underpaid using this tool. And governments have known about this for a significant period of time and refused to take action, evidenced by repeated, for a start, questions in estimates about this tool, evidenced by the campaign run by a number of organisations and people with intellectual disability to get this issue corrected. It has been on government's agenda for a significant period of time. So even while the governments, and I'll say governments because it was the previous government as well, have been prevaricating around addressing this issue and were in denial about this issue, people with intellectual disability have continued to work under this bill, under BSWAT, have continued to be discriminated against and suffer lower wages because of the use of this tool when it was well recognised by everybody else but government and maybe a few ADEs that it was discriminatory against people with an intellectual disability. They continued to be in denial. They continued to encourage its use. And what happened is that people ended up having to go to court to deal with this issue. People with intellectual disability really should not have had to end up in court to get it recognised that this tool was unfair, and they had to continue to work on it, work under it. This bill does not adequately address those issues. It does not adequately compensate people, and it has some significant flaws, as I have identified here and as Senator Moore has identified. We will not be supporting this bill, and I also have to say here that we don't think we can support the ALP amendments because people with intellectual disability and their representatives have indicated to us that they don't think this bill is flexible. I will repeat here that we have been consistently told by People with Disability Australia and others that this bill is inadequate. These are the people representing people with intellectual disability, and they are saying to us this bill is not adequate. We cannot support a bill where the people with intellectual disability, where people with disability are saying this is the peak organisations representing people with disability are saying, please do not support this bill, where the legal advisors are saying, please do not support this bill. We cannot support a bill that is not adequate, that does not adequately address the issues that have been raised by the continued use of BSWAT. As I said, this issue has been on the agenda for a significant period of time. Not for 1 second do the Greens believe that this issue should not be addressed. It should be, but it should be addressed properly. Australia has in fact a bad record of addressing the issues of stolen wages, of unpaid wages, of making sure that people are compensated for the losses they have suffered. Please do not make this issue for people with intellectual disability another one of those issues. This bill does not address the issues, and unfortunately we cannot support it, no matter how much we think that this situation is unfair. We need to actually do the job properly. This bill does not do it.